Hi, Robert. Welcome to the Autoware Podcast. You are now our third guest on the podcast, and the second for the kind of Open AD Kit and software-defined vehicle themed podcasts. And previously, I hosted Casper from ARM and SOAFEE as well, so we are on a streak here. Um,
Awesome.
can you tell us what are your roles at ARM and SOAFEE, and how are you aligned with and incorporated into the SDV world?
Yeah, so my day job or my arm job is I look after. I'm in the automotive line of business, and I look after the go-to-market for automotive in North America. So we spend a lot
As
of
well.
dollars, the OEMs and tier ones that are looking at how they make software-defined vehicle a reality, and what we at ARM can do to kind of help that along. Uh, my night job is I'm one of ARM's representatives in the SOAFEE governing body, and I also currently chair the marketing steering committee of SOAFEE. So I spend a lot of time there working with new members as they come on board, looking at how we can promote SOAFEE, how we can work with ecosystem members and other collaborations with SOAFEE. So that's my two hats, and happy to wear either of them on this podcast for you.
Uh, I mean, we also work at I also attend to the SOAFEE marketing steering meetings, right? And also you join our meeting at Autoware Foundation for the marketing calls. And we are quite aligned, Sophie and Autoware Foundation, towards the demos and uh, nice code first kind of implementations. So, Robert, I promised Casper that I'm going to ask the same question to other guests about the SDV part, because we know that software and defined vehicle is a macro trend in automotive, and everybody's talking about it. It became kind of like a buzzword very late, like lately. Can you give me your definition of the software-defined vehicle? What are your uh, bullet points, basically?
Yeah, so software-defined vehicle is an interesting term because you're right. It's a trendy term that's being used, um, but there's no real clear. This is what the software-defined vehicle is. So it's down to everyone's interpretation. Um, the reality is, it's a shift in the way that cars are going to be developed and deployed, and what's happening, kind of a bit like what happened in the smartphone world, is that the features and the functions are defined by software. And in the past, a lot of the ECUs and the modules in a car were kind of primarily a hardware box that had software in it, but that software was just doing that job, and it didn't really change over time. What we're seeing now is that the software in a vehicle, and we're already witnessing this with a number of the kind of the new OEMs, especially around electric vehicle technology, that are basically bringing more of a kind of an application, software application or software functions into the vehicle, and then those software functions can be updated or upgraded or changed or added to over the lifetime of the vehicle. And that's a kind of really interesting key point here for the software-defined vehicle, is it doesn't stop when the car leaves the dealership and it goes onto your driveway. That car can be updated, that car can be modified, that car can be changed because it's a software thing. And we, as consumers, are very used to that because that's how we work with our smartphones. We don't expect that an application is going to be the same through the life of our phone, and it will be much the same in the car. Now, there are certain functions that it's more obvious that they will change like that, the infotainment and the cabin stuff. And there are some functions which probably won't change as often, especially the sort of safety critical vehicle applications. But what's going to happen is it's going to change the way that automakers do their development right now. So because there's going to be more software, there's more software functions, and those software functions, have to be kind of live and updated. It means there's going to be a change in the way they do their development and the way they do their deployment. And that's a lot of what we've been looking at as part of SOAFEE. It's a lot of what we've been looking at as part of ARM. And I think it's going to change the relationship between the automaker and the consumer of their vehicles. And this isn't even going into vehicle sharing and all that, or autonomous vehicles. This is just, if we buy a car, we're going to have a closer relationship with the maker of that car, because we're going to have this constant dialogue with them about updating, potentially having subscriptions to certain features. So for example, your heated seats, you only need them in winter. So maybe you only pay for your subscription for heated seats in winter.
Only in the winter time.
And yes, so I think that's going to be a kind of a really interesting dynamic that's going to change between consumer and automaker. And also the consumers are really used to and kind of expect now that things are not static in the way they basically kind of work with electronic devices. And let's face it, the car is going to be the most complex electronic device that you own. It's not a single function device. There's so much going on in that car, and there are so many things that can get better over the lifetime of that car when you own it. And that is going to make a change to the electronic architecture in the car. And that we're sort of seeing that shift already, and that's one of the things that we're looking at both as ARM and also in the SOAFEE world.
I was also going to ask about that one. When you buy a car at the dealership, it must come with some kind of different hardware compute architecture, right? Because before it was all the functions were defined by the hardware. You could expect the application running on a single ECU for the functionality. Now we are going into a consolidated approach, so it has some kind of capacity to build over time with the in-vehicle software in time, right?
Yeah, and what's going to be interesting, Samir, is, does this mean, if you're looking to the future rather than just the present, does that mean that the compute architecture you put in the vehicle is kind of a bit more future-proof? Do you sort of over-provision, assuming that there will be more functions and more functionality coming in the future, which is not something that the automakers do today? It's very much a we're going to build this car to this spec, and that's what you get. And if you want it to a higher spec, well, we'll put some more stuff in it. Whereas there's a good possibility that the automakers will go, well, we're going to basically put the same computer in all of our vehicles, and the software function of what defines the spec of that vehicle. And that's an interesting concept as far as how the vehicle architecture is going to evolve over time.
Yeah, I mean that covers kind of like the compute in the vehicle, that you have a more capable compute platform in the vehicle that opens up a lot of possibilities. How about SDV has different pillars, right? So you would expect a software-defined vehicle to have a different also automotive software development paradigm. We were also touching on that when you first sent me those blog posts from ARM and AWS quite a while ago. Some of the topics were also shift left, right? Developing the software in the cloud, and then cloud looks like the edge in terms of the architecture with the parity, environment parity. So you go and develop your software and you deploy. This also kind of simplifies and streamlines the process. Maybe also we can touch a little bit on that part.
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of things, to accommodate, the end goal of having a true software-defined vehicle where all the functions are defined by software. it's going to really change the way people do their development. The first thing is that not one company, automaker, whatever, tier one, can actually do all of this stuff. It's going to need collaboration. As soon as you start collaborating, especially around software, you're going to need to start worrying about the standards. And so there are a lot of the parts of car software which are what we call non-differentiated. It's the platform that the applications run on. And so defining that using standards that everybody can kind of, work with and adhere to, it means it will make it a lot easier for, experts in infotainment, for example, to say, well, okay, here's my infotainment app. You go and run it on your platform with your standard software platform, your standard development methodology. So it's going to allow for an interesting collaboration between all of the players in the automotive ecosystem as they start to put together these software-defined vehicles. And having open standards is particularly important there. The next thing, which I think you've touched on already, is you need to have a different way of doing your development. It needs to be a more agile way. And so what we looked at with SOAFEE is taking advantage of some of these tools and methodologies and technologies that already exist. There's no point in reinventing the wheel, excuse the pun. We're already doing this. The cloud world is already, developing and deploying, software on cloud instances every day, updating them, and they have fantastic tools and methodologies to do that. And so if we can take advantage of that and at the same time allow the auto software developers to start early, this is the shift left. It's basically you start before you've even got your vehicle hardware. You start developing your software because there's so much of it. You want to have these methodologies in place where you can do, continuous integration, continuous deployment, which is the CI/CD methodology. And let's apply that to software in the vehicle. And at the same time, let's take on some of the technologies that make that easy. So one of the things we're looking at in SOAFEE is using containers, for example, as a way to easily, have these, software services much more easily kind of developed and deployed, and then using other technologies like orchestration to really make sure that the things get deployed to the right place. So we've got this new development methodology, which is more akin to cloud development or cloud native. And then the difference is that it has to know it's going to a vehicle. And one of the things that we're really concentrating in SOAFEE is understanding the difference between a vehicle software and a vehicle architecture and a cloud architecture. And then basically bringing that into the relevant standards and the relevant tools to understand things like real time, heterogeneous compute, safety critical compute. All of that stuff is still really important to vehicle development. Even though it's a software defined vehicle, you still need to worry and understand these things. And that's one of the kind of the big things that we're doing in SOAFEE. And another part to this is then having the ability to not just develop, but also test and run your software in the cloud. So let's assume we don't have our vehicle hardware yet. That's still being developed, but we want to start testing our application to make sure they work right. Again, this is done every day in cell phone applications and cloud applications. Let's do the same thing, which means we need simulation environments, digital twins, all of this technology that will allow us in a cloud instance to make it look like the vehicle, even before the vehicle hardware is available. And then lastly, again, we need to collaborate as an industry. Both the automotive industry, but also the software industry needs to come together. And this is where we're seeing a very interesting collaboration between the traditional automotive companies, the OEMs and the tier ones and some of the automotive specific software, and the more traditional sort of like software development. So the cloud developers like AWS, you've already mentioned, companies that are making operating systems like Red Hat. They're all kind of coming together now to bring their tooling and their technologies to automotive development. And that's kind of really exciting. We've seen that within our SOAFEE membership, these different types of companies that are now coming together and working together.
I think one of those places is also the Open ADKit working group, right? The parties you just counted, AWS and Red Hat, the software developers for the autonomous driving. We are gathering together at the Open ADKit working group and actually trying to prototype this kind of cloud development and then pushing it to the edge over the air update. It kind of shows a nice example of this paradigm kind of already implemented, and we can take some lessons and inspiration from that maybe.
Yeah, so the OpenAD kit is awesome. So for those of you who don't know, so OpenAD kit, okay, so within SOAFEE, we decided that having application examples and workload examples running in a SOAFEE world was a good way for people to kind of get going and get going rather than starting from scratch. So we started this thing called blueprints, which are going to be essentially, applications and automotive workloads for different types of things. So IVI, autonomous, whatever. And the first one we started with was working with Autoware to do something called the OpenAD kit, which is essentially taking Autoware and then making it accessible in a SOAFEE world. And, part of this was also bringing things like containers and orchestration and CI/CD into the development using the Autoware autonomous stack. And because it was the first, it also became sort of like the poster child for blueprints. And what we've seen, and come back to the collaboration point, is a number of companies have been working together on OpenAD Kit, which is awesome, but also a number of other companies have been taking OpenAD Kit and either bringing it over to their hardware platform, bringing it over to their software platform. Red Hat's a good example of that, and sort of showing how these applications can run in, not just open source world, but also on commercial platforms too. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that. As I say, I think OpenAD Kit's been a fantastic success for showing how people can collaborate, how they can work together, how they can take these examples, and really fostering this spirit of not one company can do it all.
When I attend not only the non-technical but also the technical meetings, lately, because we have the Evol, the reference implementation from SOAFEE is running on the platform that we have for the edge, right? The AADP. But now for the OpenAD Kit demo preparation for the CES, we are kind of also going into the cloud side and running the software on Graviton instances. When everything is containerized, we're actually seeing it firsthand how easy it is to move from here to there, as long as it's using the Evol there, for example, or could be any hardware abstraction layer. Kind of over the weekly meetings, we have tasks, and in the following meeting, we already made some progress on it. Kind of one of the ideas, right, to shorten the time to market is also working on the prototyping stage even.
Yeah, so it's very interesting. When we first kind of brought Evol over to Graviton, we had a relatively simple example. I think it was a YOLO V5 example. So it was basically doing, image recognition and bounding boxes, that sort of thing. And it was amazing how you could have the same app running in the cloud, looking at the results, and then bringing them down to this edge platform, which is, essentially what we'll be doing with vehicle hardware, running the same app in the same container, but on the hardware. And it just worked and did exactly the same thing. It's not always going to be that easy, but it was really very impressive to see quite how well, these applications can move from cloud, virtual prototyping environments, or even running natively on top of, Graviton instances in the case of AWS, and coming over then to the vehicle hardware, but, using containers, using orchestration, all that sort of stuff. It just kind of worked. And I think that was an eye opener for a lot of people.
Uh, Also, I mean, that works on the prototyping stage. Also, we are taking our inspiration from other software-defined industries. That's why we are kind of taking these new software development methodologies, right? The cloud native and OTA and everything. But there are some remarks, right? Because you're dealing with the automotive and people are using it and driving, maybe on the autonomous driving application, you are going to be on a highway. So you need to make sure that you have the the required parts from the conventional automotive industry are also reflected here. So, but in that case also, in terms of the collaboration, we are seeing really, really nice. If you want to do the functional safety related things, because we have a working um, prototype on the SOAFEE architecture, as the SOAFEE puts more stuff in there, we can take it and also on our end and implement it. It's kind of making things easier for us as well because we don't need to build everything from scratch there to sharing the parts and collaborating really.
Yeah, so one of the interesting things with SOAFEE is it's not an open source thing. There is an open source reference implementation so people can get going. And there are open source applications like the OpenAD kit that will showcase. But we're we're really looking at deployable software here. And so as part of our membership of SOAFEE, there are a lot of commercial software vendors getting involved, commercial software and hardware. So pretty much all of our automotive silicon partners are members of SOAFEE and are bringing the SOAFEE environment over to their hardware. So that's the deployable hardware option. But then we're also seeing a lot of the software companies. So RTOS companies like QNX and Green Hills, that have safety deployable operating systems. We're also seeing that all of the AutoSAR companies, the ETAS, the Electrobit, and Vector, they're all part of SOAFEE now, and so the safety critical AutoSAR part is there, and we're really seeing how people are using these different commercial implementations in a SOAFEE world to really showcase the deployability of software using a SOAFEE architecture and a SOAFEE framework.
Brilliant. Um, so we started this podcast so to build towards the CES, right? That's kind of like the flagship. We want to show as much as possible there, demos and everything. And maybe we can talk a little bit about what we can expect to see at CES. We already have some events and networking, some demo days are in place. Can you tell us your things happening at the CES a little bit?
Yes. So we, with my marketing steering committee hat on for SOAFEE, we've been sort of talking to our members and saying, hey, what are you doing? What are you showing at CES? And there's a number of SOAFEE demonstrations that are already planned and actually already working that will be shown at CES and showing different types of applications. And so the kind of nice thing here is that as you wander the show floor at CES, you will see examples of SOAFEE in action, and that's going to be a key message, I think, to kind of really show how the maturity of SOAFEE. I mean, SOAFEE's only 2 years old, but it's really matured past the toddler stage, I would say, and we'll see it in action. Um, we're also going to have a SOAFEE reception on the show floor, I think on the Wednesday of CES. We'd actually be on Tier 4's booth. So if you come to that reception, you can see the OpenAD kit in action because I have a demonstration there. And my understanding is there's also going to be a demonstration on AWS's booth showing the cloud part to this as well. We also know of demonstrations including things like eSync Alliance that shows the OTA functionality working in a SOAFEE environment. So there's all these different kind of parts that are coming together. And you're right, CES is the showcase for people to show off what they're doing. And so I'm quite excited to go to CES and being able to, talk to and work with a number of the SOAFEE members as to, kind of what are you doing, what are you showing, but also what's coming, what's next. And that's going to be the big thing for 2024, is we're going to really start having a lot more implementations, a lot more blueprints. We're going to be bringing a lot more functionality, things like mixed critical orchestration. This is all going to kind of happen in 2024. So, I think we're ripe in SOAFEE and ready to really start to meet the needs of the SDV developers. But SOAFEE can't do it all. I mean, SOAFEE is really, it's an architecture to allow developers to develop and then deploy. But, we've got our blueprints which show applications, but there are a lot of other parts that will come into the vehicle that are not necessarily in SOAFEE's kind of remit. And so what we've been doing is working with other organizations that are doing, different parts of the software-defined vehicle development. And we've been having discussions with organizations like AutoSAR, Covesa, and also the Eclipse SDV. And what's interesting is, once you kind of dig into what each of these organizations is kind of really focusing on, there's actually a fantastic synergy between them all. There's also a real commonality of membership. It's amazing how many of SOAFEE's members are also in Eclipse SDV and are also in AutoSAR and also working with Covesa. So there's this natural sort of desire within our membership, but there's also a desire from the outside world to understand how do all these things come together. And I'm hoping we can kind of share some of that as we go towards sort of CES, as to quite how you can utilize all of these different organizations and the technologies and the standards that are coming out of them, and work with them all in order to kind of make the software-defined vehicle development and deployment an easier thing for the automakers.
Thanks, Robert, for joining today's podcast session. We focused a lot about the SDV goals, and we also talked about the values it will bring. And the collaboration was really, if we want to take one thing away, I think it was the collaboration, how we are working together towards the common goal, right? So we will continue having other guests also to analyze different components like the cloud native, the OTA. I think at the end it will tie in nicely together, the puzzle pieces, so it will be nice and informative. Thank you for joining today's call, and hope to see you again in the next time in the podcast.
Samit, it's been a pleasure, and you're absolutely right. Collaboration is the key, and I hope to see that in spades at CES this year.
Perfect. Thank you. Talk to you soon.
Thank you.